Have you ever had something unforgettable on the beach? I froze. Those were Adam's words, my stepfather's words, that hit me like a bolt of lightning. I stood there on the hot sand, my bare feet pressed against it as the waves crashed relentlessly against the shore. The wind whipped my hair around, but suddenly, all the sounds of the beach faded away under the weight of his gaze. My heart pounded as I searched his eyes for clues. "What?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know if I had heard him correctly or if my mind was playing tricks on me. Without another word, he stepped closer, his movements deliberate and unyielding. "You're grown up now," he said, his tone calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "I can speak to you honestly." In that moment, something shifted inside me. I recalled all the times I had brushed off his strange looks, all the times I had wondered if I was imagining his intentions. Now, the reality was undeniable. I could feel the tension crackling in the air between us. "Is this a joke?" I asked, my voice shaky as I tried to mask my confusion with a nervous laugh. It was all too sudden, too direct. My pulse raced as I waited for his reply. No, his answer was brief, flat, so simple that it sent a chill down my spine. Before I could process what was happening, his hand reached out and grabbed my wrist. It wasn't a hard grip, but it was firm enough to make my skin tingle. I tried to pull away, my mind reeling with conflicting thoughts. I wanted to run, to escape the situation, yet a part of me was inexplicably drawn to the intensity of his presence. The beach around us continued its relentless rhythm, the waves crashing, the wind howling, yet all of that faded into the background as I focused solely on the man standing in front of me. I struggled to make sense of his words, to understand what he meant by being honest. Was he referring to something that had been unspoken between us for years? The questions swirled inside me with no clear answers. For a brief moment, I considered turning and walking away, leaving behind the confusion and the unnerving intimacy. But the grip on my wrist held me in place, as if challenging me to face whatever was coming. My skin burned with a mix of shock and something I couldn't quite label, excitement, perhaps, or fear. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a second, I saw something different in his eyes. They were dark and unreadable, a mix of determination and something else I couldn't define. "You serious?" I asked, my voice steadier now as I tried to gain control of the situation. I wasn't ready for this, not now, not like this. His silence was as loud as his words. The sound of the waves filled the pause between us, a reminder that life went on around this charged moment. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of past conversations, moments when his tone had hinted at deeper meanings. Now, everything was laid bare, and I was forced to confront truths I wasn't sure I was prepared for. Every instinct in me screamed to pull away, to retreat to safety, but I was rooted to the spot. The beach, the crashing waves, even the seagulls circling above, all faded into insignificance compared to the intense focus on our interaction. I felt as if time had slowed, each second stretching out, heavy with possibility and peril. "Don't pretend you don't know what you feel," he said, his voice low and measured. There was no mockery in his tone, only a stark, undeniable assertion. His hand tightened slightly, and I felt that mix of shock and something dangerously close to anticipation. I had always thought I understood the boundaries of our relationship, but in that moment, those boundaries blurred dangerously. I swallowed hard, feeling the warmth of his hand against my skin. I'm not sure what you mean," I stuttered, trying to reclaim control of the situation. The words felt inadequate, failing to capture the whirlwind of emotions surging within me. I wanted to scream, to demand clarity, but all I could manage was silence punctuated by the persistent crash of the waves. Adam's eyes bore into mine as if he was searching for the truth hidden within. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and strangely exhilarated all at once. The beach, with its vast expanse and relentless energy, had suddenly become a stage for a confrontation I had never expected. Every sound, every movement around us, seemed to amplify the gravity of the moment. As I stood there, caught in a web of uncertainty and raw emotion, the reality of the situation sank in. I was no longer just a bystander on the beach. I was at the center of an unfolding drama, one that promised to challenge everything I thought I knew about myself and the man before me. My mind reeled with questions. What did he truly want from me? How much of this was real, and how much was a test of my resolve? The air was thick with tension, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The answer lay in his next words, his next move. Then, just as the intensity reached its peak, the situation took a sharp turn. His grip on my wrist remained, but the look in his eyes changed, hardened, resolute, and dangerously certain. I realized in that moment that nothing would ever be the same. The beach, the conversation, and our entire relationship were poised on the brink of a dramatic shift. And so, as the waves continued their relentless assault on the shore, I braced myself for what was coming next. One thing was clear: the moment was explosive, unforgettable, and it was only the beginning. Stay tuned, because what happens next will blow your mind. The next morning, I decided to put yesterday behind me. I left my room with a determined stride, planning to start fresh. My mind was still racing from the previous night's encounter, but I forced myself to focus on the day ahead. I headed to the restaurant in the hotel, hoping for a quiet breakfast to clear my head. As I pushed open the door, I immediately noticed him sitting at a table near the window. His calm demeanor did nothing to ease the tension that had been building since last night. When he spoke, his tone was unhurried yet carried an underlying edge. "Good sleep?" he asked. His voice made me hesitate for a moment, a brief pause where doubt and caution mixed. I said nothing in return, took my coffee from the counter, and chose a seat at a table a few rows away. I needed space and a chance to think. I kept my eyes fixed on my cup, trying to avoid any unnecessary conversation. But as soon as I looked up, he was already standing by my table. His presence was unavoidable. "We didn't finish yesterday," he stated flatly. I raised my eyebrows and replied, feigning confusion, "What are you talking about?" I tried to sound as casual as possible, though my heart was pounding in my chest. His lean towards me was both intrusive and deliberate, forcing me to confront the situation head-on. "Don't pretend," he said, his voice lowering. "We both know what you feel." My fingers tightened around the spoon in my hand. I had every reason to walk away, to dismiss this encounter as a misunderstanding. But his unwavering gaze held me in place. It was as if he expected me to acknowledge something I was not ready to face. After breakfast, I made a conscious effort to avoid him. I wanted nothing more than to lose myself in the anonymity of the hotel and the bustling crowd outside. I headed to the souvenir shop to distract my mind. I browsed through the trinkets, trying to immerse myself in simple choices and mundane details. Yet, as I rounded a corner, I caught sight of him stepping out of the shop. I felt a jolt of annoyance mixed with apprehension. No matter where I went, he was there. Later, when I went down to the reception to grab my keys, he was there again, leaning casually against the desk. I couldn't ignore the coincidence. It was as if every step I took was being tracked. My morning had turned into a series of calculated moves and inevitable encounters. Determined not to let him disrupt my day further, I decided to sit by the pool and enjoy a few minutes of solitude. I settled into a chair and tried to relax, watching other guests swim and chat. However, almost immediately, I noticed him already seated by the pool, watching me from a short distance. His persistence was unsettling. No matter how I tried to escape him, he found a way to reappear in my path. I felt a mix of irritation and confusion. What did he want from me? Then, as if on cue, his voice came up beside me without warning. "Are you scared?" he asked. I barely had time to register his presence so close before I found myself answering, "I'm not scared," even though I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. I tried to keep my voice steady, but the close proximity made it hard to maintain any sense of control. He smiled, an unsettling, knowing smile that seemed to dismiss my protest entirely. Pointless. I walked into the city, needing space to think. The hotel walls felt suffocating, and I needed a distraction, something ordinary to anchor myself. The busy sidewalks, the aroma of fresh coffee mixed with exotic spices, and the throngs of tourists provided a temporary distraction from last night's events. I needed to escape his constant presence, even if only for a few hours. The soft scent of old paper and quiet murmurs of customers in the bookstore felt grounding. I traced my fingers along the spines of books, willing myself to focus on something, anything, other than him. I browsed through the bookshelves, casually flipping through pages, and for the first time that day, I felt a slight sense of relief. I had just picked up a book when I noticed his reflection in the glass window. He was already inside, watching me, waiting. I nearly dropped the book from my hands. Startled, I turned quickly and found him standing a few feet away. My heart rate spiked, and I instinctively clutched the book closer to me. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. I didn't want to reveal any sign of weakness. You didn't think I'd let you disappear so easily, did you? His voice was calm, but there was something sharp beneath the surface. I frowned and turned away, irritation building inside me. I wasn't ready for another confrontation, but he wasn't about to let me off so easily. Before I could resume browsing, he stepped closer once again, his eyes locked onto mine. You know, you could have stayed in your safe place, he said, his tone calm yet pointed. But you came here because something pulls you to me. That's not true, I retorted, my voice rising slightly with annoyance. I tried to shake off the discomfort, insisting that I was perfectly capable of choosing my own path. Then say it again, he challenged, leaning in as if to emphasize his point. But this time, look me in the eyes. I could have walked past him. There was nothing physically stopping me. But something about the way he looked at me, like he already knew what I'd do, made my feet stay rooted in place. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me before I could take another step. The motion was deliberate. His presence now physically blocked my path. You think you can just take off and disappear, he said, his voice low and challenging. Before I could react, his fingers brushed lightly along my wrist. The contact was minimal, but it was enough to send a jolt through me. I felt the warmth of his skin and a surge of conflicting emotions I wasn't prepared to handle. I hated that I couldn't simply walk away from this moment. Try it, he dared, his tone a mix of provocation and assurance. He tilted his head slightly. You keep running. But we both know you'll stop when you're ready. I exhaled slowly, gripping the book in my hands. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to change the rules of this game. As I stepped back into the bustling street, the laughter and chatter of people around me seemed distant and inconsequential. Their carefree joy was in stark contrast to the tension I carried inside. I paused only for a brief moment to catch my breath. The encounter at the bookstore had left me unsettled. I knew that despite my efforts to escape, he always found a way to be there when I least expected it. The reality was inescapable. No matter where I went, I couldn't outrun the connection between us or the complications it brought. Walking briskly down the busy street, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only a temporary reprieve. Every turn, every alley, seemed to hint that our paths were destined to cross again. The thought weighed on me, even as I tried to convince myself that I was in control. I decided to act and set my own rules. If he thought I would run away, he was mistaken. That evening, I left my room with determination. I headed straight for the hotel bar, knowing he would be there. I entered the bar with purpose, wearing a long dress that fit well and letting my hair fall naturally over my shoulders. I scanned the room and soon spotted him across the dimly lit space. His eyes locked onto mine, and without hesitation, he began walking toward me. As he approached, he said, I like this game. His tone was matter-of-fact, leaving no doubt about his intentions. I moved closer, meeting him halfway. But you don't know its rules, I replied evenly, keeping my voice steady. I was not going to let him decide how this night would unfold. He paused, and for a brief moment, our eyes met in silent challenge. Then, as if testing my resolve, he slid his hand under the table. I felt his fingers graze my thigh, an unmistakable and deliberate move. You are mistaken, he whispered, his voice low and confident. I pretended nothing had happened. I reached for my drink, taking a deliberate sip as I rose from my seat. Without a word, I walked toward the exit. I could feel his eyes following my every step, but I did not stop. I left the bar with a firm pace, my steps echoing in the quiet hallway. Outside, the cool night air was brisk. I moved quickly along the hotel corridor and out onto the street, blending into the evening crowd. I kept my pace, not looking back, determined to end the encounter on my terms. I didn't need to wait long for him to catch up. Moments later, I felt a presence behind me. I turned sharply and saw him blocking my path near the hotel's entrance. Where do you think you're going? He asked, his tone even but firm. I have my own plans, I said curtly, stepping to the side to let him pass. I wasn't about to engage in a prolonged argument. My focus was on maintaining control. He didn't let the comment drop. This game isn't over, he said, following me into the lobby. I adjusted my pace, deciding to make my own moves rather than let him dictate every step. We walked through the lobby in silence, our distance measured but tense. I headed for the elevator, planning to retreat to my room and regain some space. Just as I reached the elevator door, he intercepted me, his hand briefly touching my arm. I jerked away, setting my jaw in determination. "I'm not running," I stated, stepping into the elevator before he could block me. The doors closed, and I exhaled sharply, preparing for what might come next. When the elevator reached my floor, I walked briskly to my room. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, catching my breath. There was no time to dwell. I had to be ready for the next move. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, reading simply, "You can't hide." I felt a brief flash of irritation. He was relentless, and I would have to face him again soon. Later that night, determined not to let him corner me again, I left my room and headed to a quieter lounge area in the hotel. I sat at a table near a window, watching the steady stream of guests coming and going. I tried to focus on the surroundings rather than the earlier encounter. Before I could settle in, I noticed him enter the lounge. He approached slowly, as if calculating his next move. Without waiting for an invitation, he slid into the seat across from me. "We need to finish what we started," he said directly. I kept my eyes on him, not offering any reaction. "I set my rules," I replied, keeping my tone firm and brief. He smirked. "Rules change with the situation," he said, leaning forward. His eyes flickered with challenge, and for a moment, the tension between us thickened. The silence stretched until he spoke again. "You think you're in control, but this game has its own twists." His hand reached out once more, this time resting lightly on the table between us. I pushed the plate of food away. "I'm done playing by your rules," I stated. "I'm here on my terms." I stood up abruptly, gathering my belongings. The conversation had reached its limit. He did not try to stop me as I walked toward the exit. Outside, the night was quiet, and I quickly merged with the sparse traffic. I felt a fleeting sense of relief with each step away from the hotel. The encounter had been intense, and though my resolve had been tested, I maintained control. As I moved further from the hotel, I glanced back once. He stood at the entrance, watching silently. No words were exchanged, but the look in his eyes told me that the game was far from over. I walked on, leaving the building behind, each step a clear statement that I was no longer the one being led. The night remained unsettled, charged with the promise of more encounters. I knew our next meeting was inevitable. For now, I had set my boundaries, and I was ready to face whatever came next. When I opened the door to my room, I already knew he would be there. The room was dimly lit, and he stood by the window with a calm, confident demeanor. His presence immediately filled the space as I stepped inside. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, steadying myself for what was to come. "You knew I would come," he said, his voice measured and assertive. I said nothing. The silence between us was charged with unspoken intentions. He began to move toward me, his steps deliberate, stopping just a few centimeters away. I could see the focus in his eyes as he raised his hand and carefully brushed a stray lock of hair from my shoulder. "You're playing, but you don't know what to do when the moment of choice arrives," he said, his tone even yet challenging. I held my breath as his fingers continued to trail down along my neck, their touch firm and confident. The warmth of his hand sent a clear message. This was a moment where control was shifting, where the rules we had been following were about to be rewritten. "I know what to do," I whispered, barely audible, yet determined. My words were not a plea, but a declaration of intent, a refusal to be led by him alone. His hand lowered slowly, as if pausing to let the tension build further between us. The air felt charged, every second stretching as we stood there, locked in a silent contest of wills. For a long moment, nothing else existed but the closeness between us and the weight of the decision we both faced. I stepped forward, closing the small gap that had kept us apart. My eyes met his, and in that look, I saw the reflection of my own resolve. There was an intensity there that promised both risk and reward. I reached up and brushed my fingertips along his cheek, a small but deliberate gesture that signaled I was ready to take the next step. Without breaking the contact, he shifted his gaze downward, his eyes never leaving mine. Slowly, he allowed his hand to travel further, his touch becoming more deliberate. Every move was calculated, a blend of desire and control. We were both aware that this was not just about physical attraction. It was about power, choice, and the unspoken agreement that neither of us would be passive tonight. The room, small and unadorned, became the setting for our silent negotiation. The soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant sounds of the city outside were the only interruptions to our private world. I could feel his breath as he moved closer, and in that moment, our roles blurred, Both of us were simultaneously leading and following. His hand, now resting on my collarbone, made its way slowly, as if testing the boundaries of what was acceptable between us. I closed my eyes for a moment, allowing myself to register every detail: the firmness of his grip, the warmth of his skin, and the subtle tension that hinted at what might come next. Then, in the midst of this charged intimacy, a sudden clarity struck me. A thought, unbidden and sharp, cut through the haze of desire. I realized that we were making a mistake, that our actions were driven by forces we had not fully acknowledged until now. The intensity of the moment, the merging of our wills, had blinded us to the consequences that lay ahead. I pulled back slightly, enough to break the direct physical contact without completely withdrawing. My heart pounded, and I took a steadying breath, trying to clear my mind. The touch on my skin was still there, but now it felt like a reminder of a decision that had already been made, a decision that might not be reversible. His eyes searched mine, a silent question hanging between us. The energy in the room shifted from a charged passion to a tense uncertainty. I saw his confusion, too, a momentary falter in his otherwise confident demeanor. The realization that we were both teetering on the edge of a mistake was palpable. For a few long seconds, we stood there in that delicate balance. I had expected him to push further, to claim control without hesitation. Instead, the sudden shift in the atmosphere forced us both to stop and reflect on the consequences of our actions. There was no dramatic argument, no shouting, just a mutual understanding that something crucial had changed. The room felt colder now, as if the intensity of our earlier exchange had evaporated into the silence that followed. I took another step back, my mind racing as I pieced together the implications of that realization. We had been so caught up in the game, in the allure of forbidden territory, that we had almost lost sight of who we really were. In that instant, I made my conclusions. I understood that what we were doing, this dangerous dance of desire and defiance, was not just a momentary lapse but a turning point. The rules we had been following, the roles we had assumed, no longer made sense in the light of what was truly at stake. The realization was both sobering and liberating. As I stood there, heart still racing, I knew that the decision we faced now would change everything. The intimacy we had built up to that moment was real, but so was the risk of losing ourselves in it. And as I looked at him, his eyes reflecting a mixture of determination and uncertainty, I understood that there was no easy way out. The tension in the room reached a critical point, poised on the edge of a final, irrevocable choice. I could feel the gravity of the moment, the way each of us was caught between what we wanted and what we needed. The game was nearing its end, and the next move would decide not only the course of our night but the direction of everything that followed. I exhaled sharply, stepping back. This had to end. Now.